Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you. And I want to remind you, as always, that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute working with a licensed professional. Please seek one out in your area, whether you can do it physically or online, as much as possible. So, our our how this podcast came about actually started in 2019, where I and another about 200 of us flew to Atlanta for the first BIPOC brain spotting training, which was given by Dr. David Gran and John Edwards. And that started me on my brain spotting history. As you've also heard, I've brought on a few other of my fellow brain spotters to talk. And I've made my way from the phase one at that time in 2019, all the way to last year's, which was phase five, and a number of other master classes. So today we have the man himself, the founder of Brainspotting and the neuroexperiential model, Dr. David Gran is the developer, developer of Brainspotting, the groundbreaking relational brain body mindfulness-based method. He's the author of Brainspotting, the revolutionary new therapy for rapid and effective change, and the co-author of This Is Your Brain on Sports. Dr. Grand is involved in humanitarian activities with survivors of 9/11, Katrina, Sandy Hook, and Newtown. He has accomplished breakthrough. He has accomplished breakthroughs in performance and creativity with brain spotting sports work and brain spotting acting coaching. Dr. Grant is the playwright of his is the playwright of his 9/11 play I Witnessed and the filmmaker of the documentary Come Hell or High Water. Dr. Grant has been widely featured in the media, including the New York Times, NBC National News, Discovery Channel, CNN, MSNBC, Sports Illustrated, and Cyrus Radio. And now we have him here today on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Welcome, David.
Yeah, and by the way, Oprah Daily just dropped an article on brain spotting today.
Was just going to mention that one too. So now you even got a seal from Oprah, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't know how directly her hands are in the Oprah Daily,
Yeah,
but if her name's on it, then she's connected into it. So
very much so, which is an accomplishment since I know as we do this, it's one of those that constantly gets challenged with the idea of its efficacy. But as I've also reminded a few people when I was in supporting trainings is, well, you know everything that came up with Rogers and um, the psychodynamics stuff with, and now, of course, I'm blanking on his name. Everything had to start somewhere, and at one point, it was not considered efficacy until time and research was done.
hmm yeah, yeah. Well, it starts off by you're chasing them until you reach a certain point where they start chasing you. You know,
Precisely.
and once they start ch chasing you, they no longer t talk about whether it's efficacious or not. You know.
Hmm. Yeah. So, as I always ask everyone who comes on the show, how did you get here? And especially into this aspects of brain spotting.
Well, started like when I was 3 years old. When I would look at things in the world and I'd wonder, what is that? Why is that? Where does that come from?
Hmm.
You know, literally, I mean, it was beyond three, but we traveled out to California. I'm a New Yorker,
Hmm.
and I was always into cars and trucks and buses and so on. From This is going way back, and when we came out to California, I noticed that the buses, this is in LA, looked very different than the buses in New York.
Hmm.
Looked at it and I was like, I asked my parents about that, and fortunately they were open to me, but they didn't really have answers for that. But it's I have always looked at the world and wondered what is it, where does it come from?
Hmm.
What does it mean? Even to some degree to my detriment. because, a lot of people just either don't want to hear it or don't understand it or think what's wrong with you or things like that.
Hmm.
I mean, I'll tell you how crazy I get with this. I'm on the street in Manhattan and I see a manhole cover, you know, and I look at the manhole cover and I look and I see what's written on it, the words, the names, the numbers. I see the shapes and all this.
Hmm.
My mind goes to, I wonder who designed this, you know, and then how that design translated into how they actually made them, you know,
Hmm.
and then all of that kind of stuff. Our world, our universe is full of all these things. If we just pause to take a look at it with curiosity, I guess curiosity is the watchword of what I'm talking about. So, um, I have always been, and I still am, hyper curious. And I always say if you take curiosity to the nth degree, you get fascination.
Hmm.
It's like where it's not just what is that, but wow, that's really something, you know. Things that might seem, mundane or not even worthy of being noticed. But that kind of curiosity always goes back to people, you know.
Hmm.
It's like the people who've decided this is the kind of buses we're going to have in New York and this is the kind of buses we're going to have in LA, and even the street lights are different and all these things. Um, I mean, could you imagine what I go through when I'm traveling internationally and I look,
Oh yeah.
and it is completely different. Uh, so, you know, long story long, with brain spotting, I mean, I had a long history as being a therapist long before brain spotting. And I wasn't consciously looking for something. But what I noticed, with an ice skater who we were working on this block
Hmm.
and there's nothing else seemed to work, that when I did these slow eye movements, we got over here and I went into this intense wobble. And again, I just stopped over there, forget about eye movement, but it was just really that particular eye spot or brain
Hmm.
spot as we call it now. Um, uh, it was my powers of observation and my curiosity that led me to notice something that every therapist had to have noticed one way or another, especially those who do brain
Hmm.
body therapies, processing therapies, and so on. Um, but again, going back to my what I said about being 3 years old and looking at the world, as looking
Hmm.
through my eyes, you know. And when we look out, we look in at the same time. Even for the most part, we don't even recognize it, you know.
Hmm.
Observation is sensory, but again, what we see is so ever present to us. Um, so the idea that I saw it and then I followed it, the idea that the eyes are important in who we are and how we are as beings, that they have psychological or emotional importance. From a looking at somatic therapies, like, you know,
Hmm.
they don't look at the eyes as part of the body, you know, which again it just shows this bias and confusion and so on. Not only are the eyes part of the somatic system, they're one of the most important parts of the somatic system.
Hmm.
It's not the heart and the lungs, for breathing and circulating and so on, to keep us alive, or the brainstem along with that. But uh, it there's something so absolutely unique and special about the eyes, and that's what brain spotting is attuned to, and that's what brain spotting makes use of. And you know, I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. That I'm not smarter than everybody else. That I noticed this, and that I gave credence to it. Uh, I just am observant and curious
Hmm.
and follow and let myself follow it.
Hmm.
Every I always say this that in every therapy session that's held in every country in the world, every country, every culture, every language, there's some version of the person comes in to the session, even though it might be a different kind of format in different places. And the person is coming for a reason, and the therapist, the healer, the shaman, whatever is there. And the issue is, well, what are you coming for now? What's going on with you right now? as soon as the person starts articulating it, their eyes will jump in a certain direction instantaneously, 100% of
Mhm.
the time. Now, it may not stay locked at it over there. It might jump around and so on, but ultimately, it lands on one spot. Okay. Every therapy session that's ever been held any place in the world. Okay. And it is relevant. It's highly relevant. And it is an access opportunity into the nervous system.
Mhm.
And every therapist pays absolutely no attention to it. What's up with that?
Well, going back into the how much we're trained in the talk therapy and the frontal lobe standpoint
Hmm.
versus, again, also incorporating the body, the mind aspect of it. It's all just about that.
Hmm.
I always like to sort of describe it as think about going to the library and you know how they cross-reference material across multiple areas, even though it's all about the same book. Which section didn't get the update
Hmm.
that says, here's edition two or edition three versus only references back to edition one?
Hmm. Yeah. 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 And, the funny thing is, uh, in the West and in the United States, everything is about business. And
Hmm.
now the psychotherapy business is becoming more and more business and so on,
Hmm.
and marketing and all this kind of stuff, you know. So you would think that as the originator and developer of Brainspotting, that I would be very proprietary about this stuff, you know. We don't
Hmm.
want the word to get out, because this is our stuff. This is what makes us special. I'm giving it away,
Hmm.
you know. What I'm saying right now, any therapist who's listening or anybody else could make use of this, and that's why I'm saying it, because I want this information to be out there, you know. And if it undermines my business model, whatever it is, I couldn't care less, you know. It's absurd to me, you know. So again, this is part of, you asked like where I come from is another way of saying who am I, you know. Uh this is who I am, and to the degree that I have influence on brain spotting, I bring this into brain spotting.
Hmm.
And we don't try to be different, but we are different. It makes us different.
Which, as you said, our entire industry is under stress correction, whatever you want to name it, especially from those who feel that competition is the goal, and that's not what allows people to heal.
It's what causes people to be wounded, you know?
More, yeah, definitely. It's the greater possibility of that than healing.
Yeah. I really think that I've been under the influence of indigenous peoples and their histories and their beliefs and their wisdom, and without even having direct access to it, you know.
Hmm.
I think I just came into this world that way and so on.
You know, that's a term I've been sort of pushing back on slightly on because every culture has an indigenous culture to it. So
Hmm.
when did suddenly that shift saying that we're not indigenous come from? When did these other identities of being get in the way of every culture, every land has an indigenous population?
Uh, well, you know, that's a pretty large
Oh yeah.
topic and so on. I think the West tends to go away from that which is indigenous towards that.
Hmm.
I mean, when a culture is based on the individual as opposed to the community or the collective,
Hmm.
you're already moving away from it.
Right.
And and when the industries are such, you just take the food industry, that instead of eating whole foods, natural foods, they created processed foods,
Hmm.
and then ultra processed foods.
Hmm.
Um, that's about as non-indigenous as you can get, you know.
Right.
But I guess we could say that even in the most ultra processed foods, the original foods on that were natural.
Right. And we're going to be trying to figure out how we deal with that and that change in relationship. And I know one of the biggest things about our brain spotting and our neuroexperiential is building those relationships.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, again, um, there was and is relational therapy, you
Hmm.
know, and then by extension talk therapy and so on. And the studies they've made of all the myriad psychotherapy models that have success show that the common feature is the relationship,
Hmm.
you know. But nowadays in the technical therapies, the brain body based therapies, um, uh, everybody, most people, I should say, do it relationally, but it's not in the trainings, it's not in the
Hmm.
models, you know.
Hmm.
It's not in the theory, it's not in the practice, as it's taught. Okay.
Hmm.
And what makes brain spotting different, and this goes back to, the natural, the indigenous, is that we say that the relationship comes first.
Hmm.
Okay. And we also say that the tool is only as effective as the hand that holds it, you know,
Hmm.
uh, so that uh, so that the technical part of brain spotting is superimposed on the relational, and it only enhances the relational. It never takes anything away from it.
Hmm.
There's a whole thing in of resource models. In other words, some people who come for therapy are because of having really rough, complex trauma and developmental trauma and all this stuff can easily be destabilized or flooded or get dissociated or all this kind of stuff. And then so there's the resource models.
Hmm.
Again, it sounds like marketing. The resource model. You get it in aisle 7.
All right.
Um, uh, and what they forget in these resource models is that it only works to the degree that it is done relationally. You know, it's not, and another model has this thing, they still use this term, resource installation.
Hmm.
Now for me, I go back to the 80s, whatever, like a floppy disk,
Right.
like you put that into the computer and so on.
Hey, I
That
grew up in the 80s. I also remember the floppy disk, the
okay.
3.5 to the 5.5 point quarter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you got the technical better than I do on that. Um, but um, you don't install a resource.
No.
No, you hold a resource, and of course, this goes back to the relational. The resource, the potential resource, is already inside of the person,
Hmm.
in their body, in their nervous system, in their self, in their spirit. Their soul. You know, and so even when a person needs that extra, it's it only works really well if it's done through the relationship and maintained through the relationship. And in brain spotting, we call it the dual attunement frame. Dual attunement is based on attunement to the
Hmm.
other person. Why dual? Because you have the relational frame, and superimposed on that is the brain body eye position frame, you know,
Hmm.
which allows you to go deeper and have more accuracy in reaching unprocessed trauma that's held in the nervous system, but it's all based on the relationship.
Which also feeds into another area I think sometimes is that we forget, or that doesn't get often talked about, is the idea of there are life skills people have to relearn, especially if their parents or their caregivers didn't have those skills.
Hmm.
And we have to support those skills development, which are also going to take time and they may go longer than, shall we say, the manualized therapies present, because people have to learn, fail, learn, and be encouraged, which is still part of that relation.
And from a therapist point of view, the most important thing in that is role modeling.
Hmm.
You don't. The most powerful teaching is not in the saying; it's in the doing.
Hmm.
You know, and if you really are present and empathic and attuned and curious, and trusting and all these things in the face of whatever happens, that's really powerful role modeling for the people who never had any kind of exposure to that.
Right.
Mhm. And it gets internalized, subliminally, you know.
Yeah. What nature are you nurturing?
Yeah. Precisely.
Hmm. So I think that's a lovely place for us to take a break. So we're going to pause here for a few moments, and we'll be back to continue this conversation here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you, and here with Dr. David Grand, PhD, founder of Brainspotting and Neuroexperiential. So we've been talking a bit about Brainspotting, life philosophy, and how we've come about this. I think one of those questions I know some people might wonder is the shift from brain spotting to neuroexperiential.
Mhm.
What does that help us to understand? And how does it also, again, translate into what Oprah now is supporting?
um, uh, Brain spotting from its inception has been in a state of evolution. Okay. I always say that because everything in this universe is always moving forward. If you
Hmm.
stay in the same place, you're actually moving backward.
Hmm. Yeah, because your world's moving past you.
Yeah. And most models that get developed, they pretty much, they get developed to a certain point and that's what it is. And the changes that happen are just sort of trimming around the sails, so to speak.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
people who've come for brain spotting trainings and then come back a year, two, 5, 8 years later to say it's almost like a different training
Hmm.
because of that constant evolution. And evolution is not something you make happen. It's something that you participate in and you flow with it. And wherever it takes you is not determined in advance and it's unpredictable. So at a certain point, this goes back around 6 years, although it was developing before that. I started to reconceptualize some things, not to
Hmm.
really change anything, but maybe to look more deeply into some things and to open up or expand some other things. And so I realized that there was a deeper way that I could look at what we were doing in brain spotting, and a way
Hmm.
to expand, how we do brain spotting. And the term neuroexperiential came to me. Okay, because neuro, it's all in our nervous system, you know,
Hmm.
and and it's not just in our brain. People think brain and it's like, okay, this is it, as opposed to it goes down from the brain stem where it goes down, into the body and throughout the peripheral nervous system
Hmm.
and the enteric nervous system, which is the neurons in the digestive system and the cardiac and the heart and all these
Hmm.
things, and the ocular nervous system, because there are neurons in the eyes.
Hmm.
Most notably, the retina and the optic nerve are made up of neurons, so that as we see, we process things at the exact same time, which
Hmm.
is what makes the eye one of the things that makes the eye so crucial and prominent in terms of any psychotherapy and a healing process. So, um, we had an international conference. It was now in July, it'll be 6 years. And I presented the keynote on this for the whole brain spotting community. And so I had to really take my ideas and write them down on paper.
Hmm.
And it's interesting, whatever I presented then has evolved so far beyond that. Like I was saying, neuroexperiential, what we experience comes from the deepest places in our nervous system and ultimately begins to have glimmers coming to conscious awareness, you know, and conscious and those glimmers usually come through our senses,
Hmm.
which is what something how we perceive it. But when comes at that level, there's no story to it. There's no meaning. We're great makers,
Hmm.
and storytellers, but stories are things we make up, you
All
know.
right.
Um, so so the experiential starts with the sensory, and then it
Hmm.
goes to the emotional and the intuitive, and ultimately lands in our thinking language brain where we have ideas about it and make sense out of it. So it's a way of looking at how our systems work, you know, which is, it's not like totally different from everything else, but the
Hmm.
way that I put it together is really quite different. And I didn't do it to be different. I just did it because like it was part of my evolution, and I've been influenced by a lot of other people as well as influencing others.
Hmm.
But there are three main tenets of it right now. Um, and uh, the first one is what we call culture comes before science,
Hmm.
you know, which takes brain spotting and it places it not as a Western model because it comes from a Westerner, from
Hmm.
New York, from the United States. Okay. But expands it out and makes it global.
Hmm.
You know, what does that mean? Well, the diagnosis models, you know, that
Hmm.
you
The
client
DSM,
comes
all
in,
that. Yeah.
yeah, you take a history, you form the diagnosis, you set the treatment plan, all that kind of stuff. That's really Western.
Hmm.
And worst of all, every diagnosis ends with disorder, you know.
Well, yeah.
That
Yeah.
there are many cultures around the world that don't have a concept of that,
Oh, yeah.
for all the right reasons. They see everything as being experiential, or they see it as being communal and universal and so on. So you were going to say something, Perry?
Oh, yeah. Well, because I mean, I had some of the background dealing with allopathic medicine, and of the six systems in the body, depending on the combination of those, how they're failing becomes the thousand and plus diagnoses we have generally,
Mhm.
versus what we have in the DSM has got maybe 300 plus, and yet the sources of those things can be a thousand different things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, and again, the diagnosis model looks at how it manifests. They call it symptom clusters.
Hmm.
It doesn't look at where it comes from,
Right.
you know.
And nothing sits in isolation.
Right, right. So, the other part of the Western psychotherapy model is the evidence-based model,
Hmm.
which is research. But it's not research that you may think it is. It's the
Hmm.
research. If I'm research, it's what I tell you it is.
Hmm. The
I
qualitative.
tell you, I tell you whatever you give me. I say yes, that's research. No, that's not research. You know,
Hmm.
that's another very Western concept. you know,
Hmm.
of the expert who's going to not just rule in, but
Rule
rule out,
out.
and rule out a lot more than ruling in.
Hmm.
And more damage has been done by that, just saying in terms of psychotherapy, with saying that this model is evidence-based and this model is not evidence-based.
Hmm.
Meanwhile, therapists sit with their clients and they see what works.
Hmm.
And they also see it doesn't come from the research. It comes from the experience with each person. And
Hmm.
uh, by the time you've reached the 10-year mark as a therapist, you know more about the human nervous system and the human brain than the top brain scientists do, because the clients have revealed it to you by their presence and by their existence and by their processing. So the idea that this research that has no access to this information tells you what is and what isn't. Okay,
Hmm.
it has its place, but but again, the neuroexperiential model, we'll call it the NEM, looks
Hmm.
to be global, you know,
Hmm.
and it looks so that whatever we put out has to be neutral enough so that it can be taken by any culture and country and in any language, and to be made its own for that
Hmm.
for that culture. This was
Hmm.
part of my idea, my ethos from the beginning, but now I've really, I've formalized it with the NEM. But the other thing is that we're looking for healing wisdom that has existed around the world for thousands of years. We're looking for that information to inform and enhance and infuse into brain spotting. So,
Hmm.
that's the global model. We have, of course, we met each other at the first BIPOC training. So
Right.
the idea of how diagnosis is racialized, you
Hmm.
and pathologized, and all of this, and how it all comes from a very much of a white Western point of view.
Hmm.
We've been together in this process now for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And and the miracle that a BIPOC brain spotting community has grown exponentially and under its own influence.
Hmm.
Um, uh, just in that context, um, the only time I go into the BIPOC space is to teach the trainings that only I teach.
Right.
And I always say I'm on a temporary pass, and that pass expires at the end of the 3 days,
Hmm.
and when that happens, I step out. So there's an autonomy for our BIPOC community,
Right.
which does, again, that's not a Western idea.
No.
The Western idea is, well, you got this part of brain spotting. I'm the head of brain spotting. I have to know what's going on there. And if I don't like what's going on there, I'm gonna push that button and pull that lever and all this kind of stuff. Again, that talk about decolonizing.
Right.
You know, and what is it based on? It's based on respect, trust, sensitivity, humility,
Hmm.
all of those things. So again, that that is part of the neuroexperiential model. I don't think there's too many psychotherapy models that are built on that.
No, definitely with this standpoint of these, again, human qualities that are going to be no matter where we are in the world, no matter what gender expression is there, is a human quality.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, should be approached with humility.
Hmm.
But starting with HU and the Western models, they're approached with hubris.
Right. Which has done a lot of damage to people.
It does it every day.
Mm.
And it continues to. That's another. I was talking about trying to get the ideas out and the words out.
Right.
I don't. It's not like, hey, we have some brain spotting. I'm part of making it happen. We're so great and so on.
Hmm.
No, no. We want you to see what's going on here, so that you can see what you may be able to do with this.
Right.
Going on to other models and so on.
Well, I think that's also one of those differences between the idea of science and art.
Okay.
And both develop, but
Yeah.
the goals of the development, the way they develop in science has, in some cases, certain rigidities to it. Art can have its much more flexibility to it. I know I brain spot now very differently than I did when I started in 2019, and
Mhm.
that is the art of reading my clients. That is the art of blending the various frame setups to help my client get to where they need to,
Mhm.
versus what some I know I've heard some talk about EMDR and so forth, and I'm not going to disparage any of them when they talk about the sort of sticking with their
Protocols.
protocols. Thank you. Having to sit and that where that feels more like that's the science than the art. Are we putting in a
Yeah.
little bit of the blue as opposed to the red?
But you're giving it credit that it doesn't deserve when you say it's
Right.
science,
Right.
because it's not based on fact. Okay. The fact is, do not, the human systems do not work by
Hmm.
protocol.
Hmm.
Okay. And I'll go to the second part of the NEM, which is we say, in the face of uncertainty, all we have is the frame.
Right.
Uncertain, we have the uncertainty principle, which cites the fact that the human nervous system has somewhere between 1 to 4 quadrillion synaptic connections. Quadrillion
Hmm.
is not a word you hear like too much in
No.
common parlance.
No.
Million you'll hear, a billion, sometimes a trillion. Now with trillionaires,
Hmm.
but you don't hear a quadrillion. Okay, a quadrillion is if you take a billion, you multiply it by a million. You know, and what's the answer to that? It's inconceivable. That's how
Hmm.
vast and complex it is. That's how many synaptic connections there are in the human nervous system. What is so that's pretty fascinating and powerful information. But what's the upshot of that? The upshot is that therapists have been taught that they're the experts, that
Right.
they go and sit in front of the client and that it's their wisdom and experience that's going to allow them to provide what the clients need, you know, is an impossibility. Because in fact, when a therapist sits in front of a client, a human being, okay, their their nervous system is so vast and complex that you can't know who they are, where they've come from, where they are, and where they're going. It's an
Hmm.
impossibility, you know.
So
And
that's
yeah,
so that
so
standpoint. One is the limitations of language that we have, and just in the way it's developed. But so much of what you've also just talked about is so much of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and I know the uncertainty model of knowing where a particle is. You can know one or two of those states, but you can't know all of the states.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And when you look at something, you change it.
And as Octavia Butler said, everything you touch changes, and everything that you change changes you.
Right, right. So so that puts a completely different perspective on psychotherapy,
Hmm.
you know. And you know, people can say, "Oh, you don't have the science, you don't have the facts." This is based on neurobiology.
Hmm.
And if you say it's not true, you're just that's like being in the post facts,
Hmm.
society, which is like, hey, if it like, well, you say everybody's should have their own opinion, but not their own facts. But anyhow, the thing about
Hmm.
this is we say in the face of uncertainty, all we have is the frame. It's a very simple concept and a simplifying concept, which is that the client comes in with their own frame. What brings them there, to come to you, which for each person is different, but it's profound that they realize they couldn't work it out on their own, and they somehow made it
Hmm.
to you as the therapist, whether you're a brain spotter or any other therapist. They come in with that frame. Okay, we say it's the frame of their neuro experience. Okay, the therapist who's mindful is mindfully aware of it and receives that frame that the client brings and holds it with them, not by taking a history and not by giving a
Hmm.
diagnosis, but it's in vivo, dynamic, in the moment, and so on.
Hmm.
And something about holding that frame with the client, and what we do in brain spotting is we shape it, and
Hmm.
one of the ultimate ways we shape it is with the eye position.
Hmm.
That makes that frame different than it would be without it, you know. And then we watch what happens as a result of that mutually held frame, which has to do primarily with the client's nervous system knowing what to do,
Hmm.
intuitively, and its complexity. And what we do is we say in brain spotting, the therapist, aims to get in the tail of the comet. The
Hmm.
client is the head of the comet, and the therapist tries to get into the tail of the comet. In other words, to follow the trajectory of the client wherever they go, you know, without any preconception, without any attempt to influence it, you know, but almost, like in a quantum way, we have in the tail. If we're really in the tail of the comet, we do have an effect on the head of the comet,
Hmm.
even if it's secondary at best.
Yeah.
But all of that is how the human nervous heals. So, in the face of uncertainty, all we have is the frame. That's what that means, and that's a cornerstone of the neuroexperiential model. You know, and the last part of it is to really open up the idea of neurobiology, which, by the
Hmm.
way, since we're a global model, it's not just the human nervous system as we just look at in the West, but it's chakras and
Hmm.
meridians and acupuncture points and all all, whatever it is, and energy and all of these things.
Hmm.
Um, so I would never want in Japan or Indonesia or you know uh, South Korea for
Hmm.
them to have to change anything about not just what they do but what they know
Hmm.
to fit into brain spotting. If it isn't culturally consistent for them, you throw that piece out of
Hmm.
brain spotting, you know, um, uh, because it's meant to be flexible and permeable and so on. But again, this whole thing of the nervous system is that neurons are distributed throughout the entire body,
Right.
and if we, in the simplified version, look at what brings people to therapy, is its unprocessed developmental trauma, you know, and that each that trauma, like they say, well, where's the trauma in the brain? Oh, it's in the hippocampus or the cingulate gyrus, or the amygdala. No, it is they are the unprocessed trauma are configurations throughout the entire nervous system.
Hmm.
Wherever neurons go and wherever they communicate with each other and neural pathways, wherever that is, that's where it is. And you have to be able to access that.
Right.
Okay? Now, the relationship is part of that, but the eyes are another crucial part of that.
Right. Yeah, because especially that pain may be more emotive as opposed to fact and figures. And additionally, that standpoint that the there's really only one pain network in the body, and it doesn't tell the difference between physical pain and emotional pain.
Right? That's precisely the point. That's it. And most of all, it's human.
Hmm.
It's part of our human experience, it's part of our human histories.
Yeah, it's pain, no matter what form it takes. It's pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And pain is a signal for us that something's wrong. But the problem with trauma, especially repeated traumas going back early developmentally, is that the pain signal is there even though the danger isn't there anymore,
Hmm.
you know. And the human nervous system is vulnerable to that in ways that other members of the animal kingdom are not.
And the development of the human mind, which also includes the question about where our sense of time is. And if that pain is constant, that pain is not being influenced or reflective of time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. Just like our ancestry is not necessarily something that is bound by time, depending on how we are looking at time, whether some consider it linear or others consider it spiral.
Hmm. And some people say it doesn't exist at all.
Hmm. And all of those things can be true at the same time.
Absolutely. See, this is another aspect of brain spotting in the NEM is that it's not confined to psychology or psychotherapy. It's environmental,
Hmm.
it's historical, it's
Hmm.
physical, it's energic, it's all of those things.
Hmm.
I always say that therapists should study physics. Yeah.
Oh, I can see that. Although I don't know how many would deal with the math side of it. I know I don't.
Well, part of physics is intuitive,
Hmm.
you know. So really to understand, I mean, what is one of the things that affects human beings the most and people who go for therapy the most? Gravity.
Hmm.
We talk about grounding exercises and so on, but we don't realize this is in the context of gravity and
Hmm.
how gravity is affecting us all the time, you know.
Well, coming back to what we talked about earlier, if you're not evolving, if you're just standing still, everything is moving beyond you.
Yeah,
And if gravity
yeah.
is not pulling you down, then you're drifting away from the earth.
That's precisely the point, you know. But again, it's like this narrow Western psychological psychotherapeutic viewpoint that brain spotting just says, open up to what's there. We're not saying do anything, just be open to what's there and all its iterations and culture is such a crucial part of that, you
Hmm.
know? And not only does everybody have their own culture, everybody's multicultural,
Hmm.
you know? And when a client comes in, it's important to learn what their cultures are,
Hmm.
and they can be, you know, multifaceted. They are multifaceted,
Right.
you
Because
know.
again, nothing's in isolation. So all these cultures are interacting with each other,
And
both
going back to
positively
graduate,
and negatively.
yeah, going back to graduate school and going back to trainings and all this stuff,
Hmm.
how much is multiculturalism as a crucial aspect of who we are and where we come from? How much of that is ever addressed?
Not enough.
Not enough. I'd say for the most part, the space between my two fingers right now.
Hmm.
And again, brain spotting, it comes back to that, I know we're coming towards the end, but when you
Right.
ask where I come from and so on, I was talking about the 3-year-old who's just looking at the world, and 6 and noticing the differences between different parts of the country and all these things. That's that's what brain spotting is about. That's what brain spotting does. And that's what brain spotting encourages therapists and clients to do, you know,
Hmm.
to be open and to wonder.
Hmm. I know one of the prayers I have in my particular faith, I ask this particular set, the Abeji, which are the twin children in the Orisha faith, um, help me to continue to play and connect after I have been angry. Help me laugh and connect after I have been sad. Help me after I have been afraid to wonder and connect again. And after I have become disillusioned, help me to dream and connect again.
It sounds highly relevant to therapy healing.
Hmm. Oh,
That should be part of every graduate program.
oh, I know. I fully agree with you. And that's when they get lost in the science. But we should be starting to wrap up. And I'll just ask you this last question. And what do you think is a myth and reality around mental health?
Mental health.
Hmm.
That's the myth and the reality, those 2 words. Number one, mental. There is no such thing as mental.
Hmm.
Okay. Does it mean, if it means pertaining to the mind, what's the mind? Where's the mind? That's a
Hmm.
concept, and it's very much, it has been locked in as, although the mind is looked at in every culture, but it's particularly been westernized. Um, there's no such thing as mental.
Hmm.
Okay. And health, health is in the context of experience. Health is in the context of our history. It's in the context of our cultures. It's in the context of our spirit and our spiritual understanding of things. Um, uh, and woundedness, which is usually seen as not part of health,
Hmm.
is part of the human experience, you know. And so, um, how we address our own woundedness, and
Hmm.
as individuals and as communities and cultures, is really important. So again, so the myth is in the words and the concepts
And the limit of the language.
and the limit of the language. Yes, thank you.
Hmm. So let's continue to have good health and connect.
Absolutely.
So, where can folks find more of you and brain spotting and the neuroexperiential model beyond this our little chat here today?
A simple way is brainspotting.com, the website, and that has a lot of information on it. If you happen to be a clinician or healer or something and you want to study, you want to find out about how to learn brain spotting, that information's there. If you're someone who might be interested in getting some brain spotting for themselves, that information is there, as well as our practitioners and so on. Um, but also, you can just go on uh, uh, go on the internet and just search brain spotting. There's tons of stuff out there. Or you want to get really up to date, go on AI and ask about brain spotting and questions about brain spotting. And whatever I'm writing now is like gets gets scraped up into that. So it's like
Right.
coming from what I'm doing right now as I'm writing a second book on this. So there are all those ways to access information on brain spotting.
Lovely. Well, I want to thank you again because I know it's been a while before we had finally had this chat, and I thank you also for the mentorship over these many years and some of our recent chats. And glad you could be here.
Thank you for having me, Perry, and thank you for everything you do for brain spotting and for everybody else in this world.
All right. Well, folks, we will wish you well from there, and stay tuned. We'll have more stuff coming up in this month, which this should be coming out in March. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you. And this is Dr. David Grand, PhD. And be willing to look and see where you feel next time, folks. Bye.